The morning sun spilled over the quiet cul-de-sac, illuminating rows of identical beige houses and manicured lawns trimmed to perfection. The neighborhood was the kind of place where conformity wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Every mailbox looked the same, every flower bed lined with the same dull shrubs. But at the far end of the street, behind a white picket fence, one home stood out. Her garden wasn't extravagant, it was alive. Raised wooden beds filled with lush tomato vines, fragrant basil, rows of carrots, and sprawling zucchini plants. Bees hummed lazily from flower to flower, and the scent of fresh herbs floated on the breeze. It was a small oasis in a sea of sameness, tended to with love and patience every morning before work. Neighbors would often pause to admire it, sometimes even receiving a basket of vegetables or herbs as a gift. But that harmony shattered the day she found the letter. It was taped to her front gate in the rigid, self-important tone she had come to recognize, the official seal of the Homeowners Association stamped in the corner. The words were sharp, clipped, and condescending. It cited unauthorized landscaping, unsightly appearance, and non-compliance with community standards. The message was simple: remove the garden within 14 days, or face fines and further action. Her stomach sank as she read it, disbelief giving way to anger. The garden had been her therapy, her joy, a space she created after losing her job during a difficult year. It wasn't just soil and seeds, it was resilience taking root. And now, the HOA wanted it gone because it didn't fit their sterile vision of perfection. She spent that evening pacing between her planter boxes, the letter clenched in her hand. The absurdity of it all gnawed at her. The bylaws said nothing about vegetable gardens being prohibited. In fact, they mentioned only that front yards must be well maintained. And hers was immaculate: no weeds, no debris, nothing out of place. The real issue wasn't the garden, it was that it stood out. A few neighbors quietly expressed sympathy, afraid to speak too loudly. They had seen the HOA target others before. Someone fined for painting their door the wrong shade of beige, another for a flagpole deemed too tall. Fear had settled over the neighborhood like an invisible fog, keeping everyone compliant. But she wasn't built that way. She didn't want to fight, yet she couldn't ignore the injustice. The next day she took photos, dozens of them. The neatly arranged rows, the thriving plants, the absence of any mess. She compiled everything: dates, maintenance logs, even receipts for her planter materials. It wasn't about saving the garden anymore. It was about standing up to the quiet tyranny that ruled her neighborhood. When she sent her formal appeal to the HOA, she expected reason. Instead, she got silence. Days passed with no response. Then, another notice arrived, this time harsher, citing continued noncompliance and threatening fines of $100 per day. They were escalating, trying to break her through intimidation. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and photos, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting in her tired eyes. She started researching. She found online communities filled with homeowners who had suffered similar treatment, people bullied by power-hungry HOAs enforcing arbitrary rules. Many shared stories of resistance, of fighting back in creative ways. Some even went viral. That was when the spark of an idea flickered. If the HOA wanted to make an example of her, maybe she could make an example of them. Not through yelling or confrontation, but through visibility. They thrived in secrecy, hidden behind bylaws and meetings held at inconvenient hours. But what if their behavior wasn't private anymore? What if the entire internet could see what they were doing? The idea both thrilled and scared her. She wasn't an influencer or activist, just a woman with a love for gardening. But maybe that was exactly why it could work. Her garden wasn't an eyesore, it was beautiful. It was wholesome. It represented something people could rally around. So she took her camera, cleaned her garden, and began filming. She spoke calmly, explaining the situation. The letter, the threats, the absurdity of being told her vegetables were unsightly. She showed the garden, vibrant and alive, against the backdrop of cookie-cutter lawns. Then she uploaded it with a simple title, "My HOA says my garden is ugly." She didn't expect much to happen. Maybe a few sympathetic comments. Maybe nothing at all. She went to bed thinking it would fade into the void of the internet. But the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications poured in, hundreds, then thousands. People were outraged on her behalf. Gardeners, homeowners, even local news outlets started sharing her story. Woman threatened by HOA for growing vegetables. HOA targets resident for having a garden. It was everywhere. By noon, the video had hit 1 million views. The HOA had wanted silence. Instead, they got a spotlight. She stood in her garden, the warm sun on her face, feeling a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. For once, she wasn't the one on the defensive. He was. But she knew this was only the beginning. Because the board, predictably, wasn't going to back down. They had power, pride, and a reputation to protect. And now they were angry. She didn't know it yet, but what began as a simple video was about to become a movement. A story that would turn her quiet garden into a symbol of resistance for homeowners everywhere. And the HOA's war had just begun. The viral fame that had started as a spark quickly turned into a wildfire. Within a week, her video had reached over 5 million views. Comments flooded in from people across the country, some offering support, others sharing their own horror stories about oppressive HOAs. Local journalists began calling, wanting interviews. A national morning show even sent an email asking if she'd appear live via video call to talk about the garden that defied the HOA. But fame came with a cost. The HOA board was livid. What had once been a quiet power structure, protected by apathy and fear, now found itself under a harsh and unrelenting public light. They called an emergency meeting, trying to contain the chaos. The HOA president, a retired attorney who loved nothing more than control, sent her another letter, this time demanding she cease and desist spreading defamatory statements about the association. It was intimidation wrapped in legal jargon. Yet, the damage was already done. The community's faith in the HOA began to crumble. Neighbors who once avoided confrontations started whispering in driveways and group chats. They had seen the video, read the comments, and realized that their HOA's power wasn't as absolute as they'd been led to believe. Still, the board wasn't going to retreat quietly. They doubled down, sending inspectors to her home, photographing her yard from the sidewalk, and posting official notices on her door. They cited absurd violations. Her garden beds were too tall, her compost bin was visible from the street, her watering hose was improperly coiled. Each notice came with a threat of fines. But instead of breaking her, it strengthened her resolve. She documented everything. The letters, the photos, even the HOA members who parked their cars across her driveway to observe her property. Then she uploaded another video. They're trying to destroy my garden. Here's what they're doing now. This time, the response was even bigger. Viewers sent messages of solidarity. Lawyers volunteered to review the HOA's notices pro bono. Garden enthusiasts offered to visit and help maintain the plot in protest. Even local restaurants asked if they could buy some of her vegetables for their farm-to-table dishes. The HOA's attempts to silence her had backfired spectacularly. As days passed, her small suburban street transformed into something surreal. News vans occasionally parked at the end of the road. Strangers drove by slowly, craning their necks to see the famous garden. Her once quiet home became a symbol, a battleground between individuality and control. The HOA board tried to regain control of the narrative, issuing a stiffly worded public statement about maintaining community standards. But the internet laughed it off. Memes flooded social media comparing the board to cartoon villains, and the HOA's own name became synonymous with pettiness. Privately, however, the pressure was getting to her. The attention was exhausting. The constant eyes on her home, the unending flood of messages, the HOA's passive-aggressive retaliation, it wore her down. Nights grew longer as she sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through messages from people thanking her for standing up, reminding her why she couldn't quit. And just when it seemed like the tension might finally break, something unexpected happened. A local community group reached out, a nonprofit that promoted sustainable living and urban gardening. They wanted to collaborate, to turn her backyard oasis into something bigger, a community garden project. They offered volunteers, resources, and publicity. Together, they could transform her neighborhood from a place of fear into one of collaboration and growth. It was the perfect counter to the HOA's campaign of control. She accepted without hesitation. Within a week, volunteers began arriving. They brought seeds, soil, and enthusiasm. The once quiet street now echoed with laughter and conversation. Children helped plant sunflowers, adults painted garden signs, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh earth and unity. The HOA tried to intervene, sending a representative to shut it down, but this time, cameras were already rolling. Local reporters captured the scene, residents working together to create beauty while the HOA attempted to stop them. The footage aired that night, framing the HOA as the villain once again. The tide had turned completely. What began as one woman's fight to save her garden had become a neighborhood revolution. And yet, the HOA wasn't done. Behind closed doors, the board plotted their next move, something far more personal. The battle was far from over. The following month brought a different kind of attack, one that wasn't printed on official letterhead but whispered through rumor and manipulation. The HOA had realized they couldn't win through enforcement, so they turned to defamation. It started small. Flyers appeared on doorsteps claiming she was profiting off her garden, accusing her of selling produce without a business license. A local Facebook group, once a place for garage sale listings and pet photos, suddenly filled with posts about how her illegal garden was bringing too much traffic and attracting pests. Most residents ignored it, but a few took the bait, wary of confrontation or swayed by fear. The HOA counted on that division, divide and control, that had always been their strength. But they underestimated how much support she had gained. Her followers online immediately debunked the claims. Local reporters reached out again, this time running stories about the HOA's desperate attempts to discredit her. Each attempt only made them look worse. Meanwhile, she focused on expanding the community garden initiative. Volunteers continued showing up, and what had started as a front yard project grew into something far larger. With the help of the nonprofit, she negotiated to use an empty plot of land nearby, a space once neglected by the HOA, as the neighborhood's official community garden. When the ribbon-cutting ceremony took place, news outlets were there. Photos of smiling neighbors, children planting seeds, and local sponsors donating tools filled the internet. The HOA, once feared, now looked powerless and petty. Still, they made one last desperate move. They filed a formal complaint with the city, alleging zoning violations and public nuisance concerns. Inspectors were sent out, and for a moment, she feared everything might collapse. But when the city officials reviewed the site, they found everything in perfect order, and even commended her for promoting sustainability and community engagement. That report sealed the HOA's fate. Their credibility was destroyed. The community, once silent under their rule, now stood united against them. A petition circulated to recall the current board members, gathering nearly every resident's signature. The next election ended the HOA's reign of intimidation, replacing them with neighbors who valued transparency and cooperation. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. The garden remained, not just as a patch of soil and plants, but as a living reminder that power can crumble when people stand together. Months later, the garden thrived like never before. The seasons turned, and with them came growth in more ways than one. Children now ran between rows of flowers and vegetables. Elderly neighbors who once hid behind blinds now tended small plots of their own. What was once a battlefront had become a sanctuary. Her viral fame slowly faded into something quieter, more meaningful. She still posted updates, progress photos, harvest celebrations, tips for sustainable gardening, but the story had shifted. It was no longer about defiance. It was about rebuilding. The HOA's former members kept their distance, their arrogance replaced by shame. The new board, led by residents who had once feared them, implemented new policies, transparent budgets, open meetings, and community input. The very structure that once oppressed now served its purpose, to protect and uplift the neighborhood. Every time she looked at her thriving garden, she remembered that it all began with a simple letter taped to her gate. A threat that was meant to silence her had instead planted something far more powerful. Her garden had grown into a movement, a symbol that change could take root anywhere, even in the most controlled corners of suburbia. And as the sun set behind the rows of tomato plants and sunflowers, the soft hum of bees filled the air, carrying the quiet victory of one woman who refused to bow to control. The HOA had tried to ban her garden, but she had made it famous. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that even the smallest seed could grow into something unstoppable.